So good evening, everybody, and welcome to the November meeting of the Sacramento SMPTE chapter. My name is Paul Turner. I'm a co-host or the host. I'm not quite sure how that works out, but I've got the screen right now. Just a quick reminder that this meeting is being recorded and will be posted up to our YouTube channel as we get it completed and ready to go. Our speaker today is Giovanni Galvez, Gio. He's an expert in all things closed captioning and subtitling, and he's going to take us through the world of captioning and subtitling beyond 608, which is the old standard definition analog closed captioning format, and look at captioning and subtitling for live events. First, though, I'd like to introduce you to the management team of the Sacramento chapter. Our chair is Remington Maxwell. Our past chair is Dom Jackson. Our secretary and treasurer, and so much more, is Mona Smothers. The current managers are Bob Huddleston, Tim Walker, Patty Leonard, Gil Mazzi, myself, and Robert Erickson. And I would like to also take a moment before we talk about SMPTE to thank Ramona here at the NCM, excuse me, for setting this all up for us and allowing us to have the first in-person, although COVID protected, meeting of this entire year. So thank you very much. Okay, so a little boilerplate. We need to talk about what you get through SMPTE with your membership. There is, of course, the Publication and Motion Imaging Journal. We do have a slew of webcasts and some excellent virtual courses that allow us all to keep up with that latest technology as the world moves forward, with or without us, so hopefully with, by taking these classes. There are a number of other activities and items that we have here. We have the blog that's available on the SMPTE website. We also have a pair of newsletters. Newswatch is the technical aspects of our industry, and Insights looks into activities within SMPTE. All of these are directly available to you as well. Talking about activities within SMPTE, some things of note. Of course, we are all aware that Barbara Lange, who's been our executive director for 12 years now, is stepping down at the end of 2021. She's done a remarkable job of guiding SMPTE through pretty dynamic period of growth. I think we can all accept that our world has changed dramatically in the last 12 years, and SMPTE has changed with it. She's worked very hard to improve the inclusiveness of the organization, I hate to use the word currentness, but keeping us up to date, keeping us current with what's going on. She'll have a final column in the Motion Imaging Journal in the November-December issue, where she'll work her way through many of the milestones, I'm sure in a very self-effacing manner, that have made SMPTE the organization it is today. And she's responsible for many of those achievements as we move forward. A reminder that the annual technical caucus is happening right now. The last day is tomorrow. There are some excellent sessions we've had so far, and still more to come. But that's on right now, and if you have a chance, please do step into that and take a look and participate in the sessions. So before we move too much further, I want to just introduce you to Gio, our speaker tonight. I'm going to read this verbatim. I've worked with Gio for many years. I can tell you he is an expert in all things that have to do with captioning and subtitling. If you want to get information or knowledge, this guy is the guy to talk to. His official bio reads as follows. Giovanni Galvez is the VP of Business Development and Strategy for SyncWords. Based in New York, Gio has over 20 years of experience in the closed captioning and subtitling field, broadcast TV and live events. He and his team were recognized for standardizing and pioneering development of non-live broadband captioning, introducing file-based caption encoding workflows for MPEG-2, MXF, and nonlinear editing systems to major networks and the broadcast industry in general. He's currently working on AI-powered technology to automate the timing and translation of live virtual conferences. And prior to SyncWords, Gio spent almost 6 years as a product manager for captioning and subtitling products at Telestream, as well as founding and organizing the Community Sound System Festival DMT project that provided free access to sound systems to Washington DC event and community organizers. At this point, Gio, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and you can go ahead and take over. And I will mute my microphone so that you don't get any of the room noise until such time as people have questions. Over to you.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate that. And thank you all for joining us this evening. First, I'd like to just say how excited I am to present about a subject matter that's close to my heart, as well as as my main career path in the broadcast industry. What I really wanted to do is come up with a presentation that's relevant to today. As Paul said, organizations like SMPTE and broadcast in general has completely seen an evolution, a revolution in a lot of ways because of the lockdown, because of this distant work environments and general business practices as well. What we have seen is an explosion of live streaming in order to conduct business. And as a result, we've seen an explosion in the requirements and the need to make those meetings accessible and also the live streaming sessions accessible. So that's where that segues right into my presentation. As you know, 608, as Paul mentioned, is the old standard for captioning. It's a standard that's been around since the late 70s. It's evolved. It's every television that's been purchased in the last I'd say 20 years has some sort of 608 decoding, and it has been kind of the foundation for all things captioning, especially for live streaming. And I wanted to talk about how that's evolved, what are some of the standards that surround this, and how people are leveraging this technology to connect accessibility to things like Zoom meetings and virtual conferences and even corporate applications. So that's, I think, very relevant to the way things are today. But when you talk about this, the need for live event captioning, right? The needs are kind of similar to broadcast because you have essentially live feeds happening 24/7. You have to think about if it's not done with AI and you're going to find a real-time captioner, they have to be sourced somewhere. Sometimes they have to be sourced in a way that they can type in different languages. Not all conferences and Zoom meetings and live streaming is done in English. That might surprise some of you, but it's the case. And scheduling workforce is also critical, right? We've seen time and time again, people waiting to the last minute and they're saying, oh my gosh, what do we do about captioning for our live streaming? That's pretty standard nowadays. And then having to scale that to be able to support everybody is a huge challenge right now for the captioning industry. The expense is always there, that's always, captioning is not something that's cheap. You can imagine what people's budgets are now, and for live streaming as they start realizing that they have to have accessibility within those as well. And then of course, there's a requirement now to localize the live stream. And by that, I mean, not everyone that's doing business, that's a viewer of live streaming and live events speak English. And to grow your audience, right, internationally has always been one of the key challenges for all broadcasters, right? What's the name of the game? You want more viewers, you want more engagement. So there's got to be a way to deliver not just a single language, but to deliver multiple languages for live events. And then of course, there's quality issues, there's accuracy issues. How does that translate to artificial intelligence as it relates to real-time captioning? And then latency. People don't want to talk about like, hey, okay, add captioning to my live event, my live stream, but is it going to delay it? Is it going to give it more latency than it already is? You know, that seems counterproductive. You know, no one seems to want to sacrifice that just to put accessibility there. But how do we get there first? You know, for USA, Canada, and Mexico, and a lot of Latin America, actually, you know, CEA-608, 708 has been the standard for broadcast television. It started with you know, vertical blanking intervals and standard definition days with hardware encoders, and now, you know, in the digital age, we see transcoding systems, which, you know, I help build some of those workflows where they can insert this data right into your mezzanine file and your deliverable file as well. And then, of course, there is European standards, right? Like teletext, standard def. You know, in Australia, we see OP47, DVB subtitles, which has been adopted a lot by cable systems, you know, all over Europe and Latin America. There's still open captioning and subtitling. That's still a thing. People like this because oftentimes they need to see the captions no matter what, and not rely on some kind of decoder. In certain sectors in the world, like South Korea, you know, they use 708, but they use a subset of 708 that allows the televisions to decode the Korean characters, which, by the way, is something that 708 has always been able to do, but not all televisions were made equal, right? And decoders just didn't have the character sets in order to display those Asian characters in 708. We see a lot in the offline world, transcoding with IMSC, you know, translating, the whole concept of translating all of these different formats to something that's human editable using TTML. That's something that's been adopted in IMF. And then there's obscure formats like that are, you know, specific to, say, places like Japan. The Arab subtitles, which is an extreme challenge there, especially for live events. I actually was lucky enough to speak to a service company in Japan, and apparently to do a live event with subtitles there, you have to have several captioners actually connecting to the event simultaneously in order to keep up with all the characters. It's kind of an art form in its own right. So these are some things, but how do they relate to live streaming? And you know, really the standard that I've seen, and it's been kind of adopted by all these you know, live streaming services, you know, like Vimeo and YouTube and Brightcove and all of these things, and the broadcasters, of course, drove that, is adding 608 to you know, an RTMP stream, you know, via SEI data. That seems to be the standard. But there are other standards that are becoming a challenge to that standard for many reasons. Another standard is to do a live sidecar VTT stream. There's a lot of advantages to that, right? And then, of course, there's another concept of translating 608 in real time to HTML that can be just delivered to a web page. I'll demonstrate what that looks like in just a few minutes. But note the limitations. Why would anyone consider anything other than 608 for streaming? Well, first of all, it's an old format. You can put 708 into a RTMP, but there's nothing that decodes it. There isn't going to be anything that decodes it. People are just moving away from that. One of the limitations there is a single language issue. Anytime you have that limitation, you're hitting a wall when it comes to localization for live events and live streaming. There's no possible way with 608. You can put other channels, different languages, but the players just won't decode them. They're only going to decode channel 1. So as a result of that, it's a limitation on the decoding. But then there's also a limitation on language support. right? 608 does not do Japanese. It doesn't do Russian. It doesn't do any of these like Unicode type characters. And so if you want to do live streaming with captioning in Japanese, you're kind of hitting that roadblock, right? There's just no way to do it with things like Vimeo or YouTube. And then, of course, you have to add the data to the video with SCI-608. What does that mean? It means that 608 was designed for NTSC workflows. If you have a different frame rate, and you're from different parts of the world, then that's a problem, right? You could get into serious problems with how that's been added. And so really, it's not future-proof the way things are right now with 608 and live events and live streaming. This is kind of like let me just kind of minimize this. This is kind of like the traditional way that started, right? You had an encoder inserter that did 608 captions for television. And the output would just have the video VBI data there, or the bank data if it's in high def. And then you'd have a streaming encoder just pass through. You know, they would transcode it with the captions. So you would have an RTMP that already had the captions baked in. But that's changed because, especially now, working from home, and you may even have seen, you know, when you're watching the news during the COVID times, where even broadcasters or the weatherman is broadcasting from their living room through Zoom, right? So there wasn't really a way to have a closed caption inserter, hardware inserter in the mix at all. So there were cloud-based solutions that essentially what they did was they would add the captions to the stream downstream from the streaming encoder. And you'd have the real-time captioners, right? Keep in mind that's when I'm introducing them in the picture here. This is the industry standard, right? They're not going to change their system. Just so you understand, you know, there's thousands of real-time captioners. They're the ones that are captioning all the news and the sporting events every day. They're not going to change the way they work. There has to be a system that supports what they do. And so there's now cloud systems that can essentially emulate a hardware encoder in order to insert the captions downstream into the RTMP. Yes, that does increase latency. That does make it a liability, quite frankly, because if for some reason that does something to your, you know, to your transport stream, then you have no video at all, right? So it's kind of risky to do it this way. And there's been some horror stories as a result of this. But generally speaking, you know, what needs to happen there is they have to take apart your RTMP stream, insert the data into the video codec, and then remultiplex it and then send it out and try to do that with as little latency as possible in order for this to work. Well, I can tell you that, you know, when March of 2020 happened and things started getting locked down, I had a lot of people from the corporate sectors, you know, you name it, pharmaceutical companies, you know, people that make trains, planes, automobiles. They were now reaching out to me asking, well, what do we do? You know, how can we add accessibility to our live events, to our live streaming? When I told them about this workflow, it just was completely over their head. You know, these folks are not broadcasters. They don't know what 608 is. And even if I explained it to them, you know, they just don't care what it is. They just want a solution. So as a result of that, what we introduced was a way to translate 608, right? Because you still had to do that. Since the captioners are all still typing in 608, you know, if you hire a real-time captioner, that's what they're going to be using as far as a protocol. And then that can be translated to plain text. Essentially, it's a real-time decode. The difference here is that the delivery, instead of delivering it as part of the video, it's now being delivered as part of a web-based platform. Zoom is a perfect example of that, right? Within Zoom itself, you see now a way for these real-time broadcast captioners that essentially work in 608 code. They're able to connect to your Zoom event and have that caption, right? In turn, the Zoom event can then stream to Vimeo and Facebook with 608. But at least there is no need to actually touch the video, right? It's being received, translated, and deployed in something very lightweight and separate from the streaming encoder. This is what it looks like now. And I'm telling you that there's thousands of virtual conferences happening every day. I don't do all 1,000, but I do many. And they're deploying the translated 608 data as HTML, right? So that they don't have to worry about the video workflow at all, right? So the concept of translating 608 is really a reality now. It's something that's in production. And then, of course, I mentioned, you know, once you've translated the 608 to text, now you have English as a text or whatever the input language is. It doesn't have to be English per se. But now there's an ability to use machine translation to deploy multiple languages, right? Again, 608 is limited to a single language. The machine translation can translate in real time to many different languages, and then we can deploy all the languages all at once. When you're talking about 24/7 real-time workflows, you know, it looks something like this, right? You need a way to synchronize the real-time captioning with the machine translation. And now you can deploy that translated HTML caption, the live OTT captions via VTT tracks. That was the second standard for streaming that I mentioned. And then, of course, if you wanted to, you could, you know, go downstream to a hardware encoder and go back to 608 if you really want. We have a major news broadcaster from the UK doing exactly that. They are translating their English news feed to Spanish, and then on the ground, they have a closed caption encoder that's receiving the Spanish translated 608. So there's ways to do that and localize it even for broadcast. But we were approached by a particular broadcaster that kind of wanted something as part of the video stream. They wanted something that would work on mobile. They also wanted translated to 7 different languages, right? You may know them, they're the NHK. You know, I did get permission to use this, by the way, from them. And so this was a big challenge for us, right? How do we do this? How can we take the English caption, because they're already captioning in English in 608, translate the 608 to plain text, then translate it to other languages and package it in a way that it can be deployed 24/7 for all their news content around the clock. And this was the result of it, right? We're able to now, anyone can go to their streaming website on their homepage, and they can watch the subtitles in the language of their choosing. In this case, you know, we're seeing the news being translated in real time to French. And that was the way that was done. It was done by translating the 608 to VTT streams, and then creating a new manifest file that could pull the audio, video, and the VTT multiple languages, right? And that worked pretty well. It went into production over the summer of last year. And so the challenges that can be solved is integrating with existing production-ready live OTT workflows. They were already doing, in this case, HLS. Convert the 608 text to streaming format subtitles, VTT in this case. There was no need to transcode the video, multiplex it, demultiplex it, insert it, or do anything with the video, to be honest. And then have it be compatible, right, with off-the-shelf players, you know. There's even open source players that's being used there. I believe it's hls.js that was used. It supports the VTT live captions there. And then of course, what they really wanted, the simultaneous language outputs, right? And what does that mean, right? They started with 3 languages. Then they said, this is working really well. We're getting viewers now all over the world. We're getting viewers that we never had in Thailand, in Vietnam, in France, in Latin America by the thousands. We see the analytics. We see how much this is helping people tune into our news programming. So then they scaled up to 7 languages. And the truth is they can continue doing this. They can continue to scale up as they see fit. Let's say they decide they want to, do a translation to Welsh or Italian. They could easily do that with this workflow and essentially, grow their audience. So how does this work essentially, right? So the human captioner is already there because it has to be, right? They're a broadcaster. So they're already paying for the captioner. They're doing that 24/7 for their broadcast feed, no matter what. So we're taking the accuracy of the human captioner, the 608 that they're typing, we're translating it, and that's how we're getting accuracy on the translations as well, right? Because the way it works is essentially every time they hit a period or an end of sentence punctuation, that gets translated. And so it looks something more like this, right? Bypassing the encoders, doing the translation from 608 to plain text, and then doing the streaming. Here's a little bit more context on this, is how do captioners get the audio? I don't want to focus too much on this, but believe it or not, captioners now, it used to be that, they have to listen, right? They have to have a way to hear the audio to do the live caption. And it used to be that they would just connect via like a phone bridge, right? Like an analog phone line. Those days are over now. I'd say the majority of captioners now are captioning even your broadcast TV shows through like things like Zoom, right? Because it's there. It's now a household name. It's also like they've kind of gotten hip to it, Even the most old school captioner knows how to connect to a Zoom meeting to get low latency audio in order for them to caption the program. So that's a big change from what it was in the past. So back to the VTT stuff. It is a standard, but how does it work, right? So we have the real-time captioning feed that gets translated to VTT, right? The VTT, then you can deploy just that single language. You can add a translation, create a sidecar, right? But essentially what it's really doing is it's creating an M3U8 manifest file, right? And in that manifest file, you have entries for the audio video. You have entries for the each language. And then the player just reads that. And that's how they're able to do it, right? That's how they're able to deploy the multiple languages simultaneously. And it works quite well. But essentially 608 is still in the mix because of the real-time caption, the people in the front end, because that's just the system that they use. But by translating that 608 to something that can be used now, you can deploy in a lot of different ways. But then there's still another challenge, right? I talked to you about players like hls.js. There's a couple of other players out there that can read VTT. Well, guess what? Social media players do not read VTT subtitles, right? They have to do 608. So the same challenges apply, right? But what if you have a requirement, which we did? We had a broadcaster say, look, I have a Chinese Facebook page for my broadcast company. And in that Chinese Facebook page, I want to do the live streaming and I want Chinese subtitles. So the only way to do it is really with burning subtitles. And the reason is because if you go to the FAQs, for all of these social media platforms, they either don't support captions at all for live streaming or they're just stuck in 608 land. And so what we ended up doing is we did the same workflow there. We took the 608, we translated it to VTT, and then we did a transcode and did the burn-in. And that was the way we were able to do live subtitles in these non-608 supported languages via social media. And that's basically like, you know, it is a shame because, you know, they adopted the 608 standard because that's what was requested from the broadcast chain, right? That's what was there. But in the future, we're seeing a huge demand for support for multiple languages to go beyond 608, as this presentation is entitled. So that is my presentation. I would love to know if there's any questions. I'd love to have a bit of a Q&A session, if that's okay. And if not, you know, please let me know.
Hey, Gio, I've got a couple of questions based on the presentation, just to get the ball rolling here. You've talked about machine translation, machine learning translation of the 608 into the various VTT formats that you're sending out. Is that a cloud service? Is that a local service? Where is that housed?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the truth is it can be both, right? But we felt that it was more effective as a cloud service, right? So for example, here in you know, in our cloud, just so you could see what's going on here, you know, like in this case, I'm doing like a 608 translation setup. So when a closed caption encoder opens up to receive captions from a court reporter or a captioner, they have to provide an IP and port, right? And it's all via IP now. They don't use dial-in modems. And now people are trying to get away from hardware encoders because they're just not scalable, and they're just, you know, they may be in some machine room that they can't access right now. So once you have this port and IP, it's very simple to connect to it, right? So you have a captioner, let's say in this case, I'm the captioner, and I'll go in and you know, I can emulate that, right? So I can go into that device. And
Gio, I'm sorry, just as a heads up, Gio, we're not seeing your screen.
Oh, really? Okay, my bad. Let me try that again. Can you see it now?
No, it says you're sharing, but it's a black screen.
Oh, all right. Let me try maybe just this. How about now?
Nope. Can you do it with hand puppets? That's.
All right. Well, I don't know why it's not able to share, but the key thing there is once we have the port and IP. Let me, maybe if I get off of full screen here, I can kind of share here. Are you seeing now something?
Nope, sorry, still that problem.
Yeah, all right, no worries. So let me just explain what that is, right? So these captioners, they're always been working from home, even before the pandemic, right? They always connect remotely, no matter whether it's, you know, the late show or the nightly news or the Olympics. So they have to use IP. It makes the most sense for it to be a cloud service, because all they really want is they want an IP and port number to type into, right? So essentially you can fire up a virtual decoder on the cloud at any point. And that virtual decoder is what's going to be able to receive their data and then deploy it whichever way it needs to be deployed, whether it's for broadcast, whether it's for a Zoom meeting, or whether it's for VTT. So I hope that makes sense.
Does the fact that it's a cloud service add variability in the latency that's involved there?
Yeah, so that's a good question. In some cases, if the cloud service includes a way to modify the RTMP, then yes. But in other formats, when formats that aren't like utilizing some way to add captioning to the RTMP, that's really minimal latency, because it's just very low bandwidth, right? It's just text, very, very small bytes of data that's being sent.
That's got questions. I've got one more.
What's the price point on the cloud service versus going with like an encode?
So I don't know if you can hear that. Ramon is asking, what's the sort of price point on going to a cloud service as opposed to a localized encode? I think that was the question.
It's a dramatic price difference, you know, like an encoder, you know, still till this day, it's going to be thousands of dollars of investment to have a hardware encoder, whereas a cloud-based, you know, service is you just pay as you go, right? So we're talking about, let's say, even if you're just doing one event a month, right? It's going to be like, you know, like minimal, like, you know, under $100 to fire up a virtual encoder than it is to actually purchase and make that investment on a hardware encoder.
So Ramon is asking if you have figures on just generic latency on your service for just a straightforward insertion of captions. Is it milliseconds? Is it frames? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, it's depends on two things, right? For the input language, we're talking, you know, milliseconds. As soon as, you know, they are typing. Of course, that doesn't account for the latency of the actual court reporter, right? The court reporter is still going to be late by, like, say, a couple of seconds, right? But the actual cloud service, you know, we're talking about maybe, you know, 1 or 2 milliseconds, I would say, before it receives it. The translation, on the other hand, you know, it has to compute until the sentence is over, just like an interpreter. So that can add, you know, latency to that, to the alternative languages if that's needed. But the input language is very minimal. Having said that, you know, there's also workflows where you can get the audio with low latency. I mentioned how captioners are leveraging things like Zoom now in order to get the audio, right? So they're getting the audio via like WebRTC or something like this. But the RTMP has to go through a server, right? And in which case, that server is going to introduce latency to the RTMP. So there's a way to actually delay the captions from the court reporter in order to match the latency of the RTMP server. And that actually works quite nicely as well.
Do you have the same sort of legal requirements on quality and accuracy of the captions when you put them into web streams? Because I know they're very tight tolerances on the broadcast side. Well, is that an issue in the web side of the equation?
The only issue really is with when you're talking about pre-recorded content, right? They expect the same level of quality. Specifically talking about, you know, FCC, right? I can't speak for other countries, but I can tell you about that. They're looking at quality to be equal to the, you know, the show that's been aired on TV that's pre-recorded. But as far as live is concerned, there's not that many requirements there. I think it's more about just having it there present, to be honest.
From the floor to other questions. Anybody online with some questions, you can type them into the chat and Gio will be able to see them.
I have a question. I understand in Caption 708 that some of the features of that is to have font size, font type, font color, to be able to change it. And I've never seen a broadcaster doing that. Does anybody else see one? Do you know of any broadcasters that are utilizing color, or font type. I'm just not seeing it out there.
I'm not sure if you can hear. If you could hear it, fine. But if you can't,
Yeah, I was able to hear it. Just for everyone on the Zoom, he's asking about 708 specifications. Now, you know, when you're watching 708 on your set-top box or your television, if you have an ATSC antenna, you'll notice that you can actually change the font styles, the size, the colors, all sorts of things like this. However, broadcasters don't really deploy with custom fonts or custom size or something like that. There's a rare exception to that. But for the most part, the reason why they don't is because they have these hardware encoders. And these hardware encoders are essentially, they're not 708 native encoders. What they are is they're receiving 608 data from the court reporters, the captioners, right? And then that's getting translated to 708. So they're taking, like, you know, the 608 and then they're trying to come up the equivalent. So it's going to be like a default font with a default color, right? There's not going to be any special tags there. Having said that, you know, with specialized software, you can do it, right? I've experimented with that. I was a manager for a software that actually could, you could put even Chinese characters in 708. You can put 20 different languages in 708. Actually, we hit a bottleneck bandwidth at around 7 languages. And then we had a player that could play them, you know, and there was a way to even use an RF modulator to send it out to a TV to see them. But broadcasters are not doing it because of the encoders, because the encoders are just translating 608 to 708. So I hope that answers that question.
I believe so. Again, opening the floor to any other questions.
How is slang handled is translated? Like slang and different, you know, the specific language, how is that translated?
Again, I don't know if you're picking that up, Gio. The question was, how is slang handled? No, English slang translating into Korean slang, for example.
Yeah, that's a challenge, you know. Yeah, I wish I could share my screen to show you, but I'll describe it instead. So basically, you know, when you're talking about real-time translation, right, it's not feasible to hire captioners in Korean. In fact, I don't even know that that exists, right? Like we have situations even in Latin language characters like the Philippines, where there's no such thing as a court reporter for Tagalog, right? So it has to be done through machine translation to translate the English to Korean. Because of that, machine translation engines, right? And I'm talking about off-the-shelf ones, right? The Googles, the Amazon ones, the Microsoft ones. There's a few others like DeepL that are specialized for European languages. They accept a translation dictionary. So if I know I'm going to be, you know, like interviewing, like, you know, maybe the hip hop team from New York, and, you know, they're going to be speaking in slang, I could put that dictionary, that translation glossary into the system in advance. And then you'll get that accuracy that you want. Same thing with ASR, right? The input language. I could put my name, I could put everyone's name in. And that's honestly standard procedure for live captioning. We always ask for a dictionary of some kind. During the Olympics, right? You had all these major broadcasters, you know, like basically they have a roster of names of all sorts of countries, you know, and you probably don't know how to spell them. So they get that list, they put it into the glossary, and that's how they're able to do it. That's how they're able to handle the accuracy. Well, the dictionary for the translation can be, this is a question on the chat, by the way, it says, who writes the dictionary for the slang translation? Typically you know, the broadcaster would have to get that approved, right? Whoever is the content originator they'll be asked from the caption company, they'll be asked, give me the dictionary, you know. Now they'll either get it or they won't get it, but it is their responsibility.
Or do you have?
Yep, okay.
So I know in the US, television broadcasters are required by law to provide closed captioning. Are other content providers, like streamers, required to provide closed captions? A Netflix or a YouTube, or is it a legal requirement?
No, not in the same way. It is not a legal requirement, although there's exceptions to that. For example, if you're an educator, if you're publicly funded, you know, which most universities are, if you're a government agency, you're doing streaming, right? Some of you, if you've been around the broadcast industry, you'll know, like, even people like the US Postal Service have their own TV channel. And so they are required, even if it's for streaming, just because it falls under a different regulation, like Section 508 of accessibility guidelines. Having said that, there was some litigation several years ago with Netflix. There was an argument around the ADA compliance, right? That basically said because you have such a huge, you know, subscription base, then you are considered a public, you know, a public viewing platform, right? Similar to like a movie theater or you know, like you know, if you're at a bar or something, you know, technically in some states you have to do it. So there was a lot of litigation around it, you know. I think eventually Netflix lost, they appealed, but they went full hog on making sure everything was subtitled to avoid any future complications.
Just looking around for any other questions. Oh, we've got something that's come in from the chat. You can see there, Gio.
Yeah, sure. For non-live presentations, is there a mechanism to correct errors in previously generated captions? Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You know, for a long time, there's been, you know, editing software for captioning correction. That's a positive thing. Now, you see that on the web now. You see cloud-based ways to do it, right? You know, my company has something like that, but there's several others. You know, there's probably like a dozen of them where broadcasters are actually doing that. They're taking live content and fixing it for VOD, right? So say if the show was aired live, they want to get the captioning corrected before they put it on demand. So that's a thing.
I have one question. In a recent NASCAR race, was it the closed captioning that called it "Let's Go Brandon"?
NASCAR? Paul, I didn't catch the last part of that.
The question was it the closed captioning on NASCAR that put up the "Let's Go Brandon" caption?
You know, that's a good question. To be honest with you, you know, I'm so busy watching my clients' videos, I never get a chance to watch NASCAR, but I'll have to research that. I'm not really sure what happened there.
I think it was, but I do have actually a more serious question, and this is probably a pretty broad question, but what types of careers are available in the closed captioning industry, if you will? And I'm sure there's a lot of them, but if you could touch on a few of them.
So what is available, Paul?
Careers. What kind of job?
Careers.
Yeah.
Right now, what's hot, the hottest thing in captioning right now is virtual conferences, right? You see people like NAB being canceled twice. I'm sure everyone knows about that. You know, IBC's looks like they're going forward, but that is iffy also. Virtual conferences are happening every day, all day. All those conferences that used to happen in Vegas, that, you know, they've kind of made a commitment. Even if they're going to do it in person, they're going to have a hybrid. And so what's happening right now is all these AV companies even post-production houses, production companies, they're offering their services to support these virtual events like the one we're having right now, right? As you saw, we all kind of struggle with the cameras and the audio, we could just hire someone to just handle that. And if they needed caption, of course, you could find people there. So really that's the name of the game. As far as a company, I can tell you that we've grown like 4 times in the last year, which is saying something, because it was always a challenge. I basically took our business plan at early 2020 and said, okay, well, that's not going to work. And we had to reinvent ourselves. But the virtual conference space, has a huge amount of need for accessibility, live streaming, know-how, audio, video routing, and of course, if you're not necessarily as a captioner, right, but as someone that knows how to consult and how to connect the captioning to, say, a new virtual event platform, that is basically like if you have the video chops, the corporate people are the enterprise people are really looking for this knowledge in order for them to deliver their content.
And Gio, I'm guessing jobs are going away as more automation is used for.
You would think that, but I'm not seeing it. I'll give you an example. We're booked for the next 3 weeks solid, all human captioners, right? We just can't find enough captioners to meet the demand. So maybe the jobs are moving away from broadcast, but they're not moving away. There's actually a huge demand for captioners. And I have to say that had I been a court reporter, I'd probably be making more money than I am now, because it's just, they're in such huge demand right now.
Well,
What could you make as a captioner?
Yeah, I mean, anywhere, it depends, on your specialty and your experience, but, anywhere from $100 to $200 an hour. I'd say that's pretty standard, and they've been always working from home, so that there's nothing different from them,
I presume there's some kind of qualification you have to do this, though. So Bob and I can't go home and learn this in 6 weeks and sell ourselves out to the lowest bidder.
Well, court reporters that make that kind of money, they've gone through years of training, right? They know their shorthand system. They have experience. They know how to, if someone tells them, hey, I have an everts and you need to connect to this port, they know what that is, right? No, it would take years to train to become that level of captioner.
Damn. Okay, I think we're running towards the end of our time. On behalf of everybody here and everybody on the line, I'd like to thank Gio for lending his expertise to this presentation. It was extremely informative, and I really appreciate working with you to get it done, mate. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thanks so much.
A virtual plaque for you that I'm sending you from my head right now. But there's actually a physical thing that you'll be, yeah, there you go. There's a physical entity that will be on its way to you. So a little thank you from the SMPTE chapter.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. It means a lot. I miss being in Northern California. There's something very special about the area where you folks are living, and I hope to travel there again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Gio.
Bye, folks.
Good night.
Take care. Good night.